All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. For those of you that don't know me or that I haven't met, my name is Colin Diaz. I'm the president of the Culver City Chamber, and thank you for joining this morning's Issues and Insights. Obviously, if you've been following along either the city or at City Council, you've seen that the City of Culver City has a vaccine verification mandate for covered businesses that goes into effect on November 29th. And so I reached out to Jesse Mays, who is the assistant city manager, I feel like we're taking the show on the road. This is, I think, his third time sharing with a group of businesses in our community. But now that the order has essentially been codified at council, it was important for us to get everybody back together. So with that, I will turn it over to Jesse, who will go over the order. If you have questions, if you don't mind dropping those in the chat as well. We're expecting a few more people, and I don't want to have us unmuting a meeting. So if you drop the questions in the chat, we'll be sure to funnel them to get answered. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jesse.
Great. Thank you, Colin, and good morning, everyone. Appreciate your time this morning, and appreciate Colin for inviting me here to talk to you guys about the city's vaccination verification requirement. So a little background, the City Council discussed this policy twice, once in early October and then earlier this month. And their intention in having a vaccination verification requirement is based on a recommendation from August from the LA County Department of Public Health. And they basically encourage local jurisdictions to consider vaccination mandates for locations where patrons and employees might spend significant amount of time in close contact with one another unmasked. And so you started to see these vaccination verification requirements pop up not only around the country earlier in the summer and earlier in the fall, but here in Los Angeles County. The County of Los Angeles approved a vaccination verification requirement specifically for bars and lounges. And then earlier this month, the City of Los Angeles approved a vaccination verification requirement that's very similar to Culver City's, and that began within the last week. As Colin mentioned, the vaccination verification requirement takes effect on November 29th. That is the first day where certain categories of businesses are required to verify vaccination status for anyone coming indoors at their location who is 18 or older. Businesses are also required to verify vaccination status for their employees who are on site. And the vaccination verification requirement also applies to the city. So here at the City Hall, we've been going through a similar process to the ones that you all may have already started in thinking about how to implement this. The mandate is fairly flexible for how you want to enforce it. But basically, we do require that you spend a little bit of time thinking about it and how you're going to do it and come up with a written protocol. We have a template on our webpage at culvercity.org/coronavirus. You'll see a big blue button there marked coronavirus resources, vaccination verification resources. And if you click on there, you'll find a link to a template that your business can fill out to make sure it's in compliance with the requirement to have a written protocol. It sounds a little bit more complicated than it is. We basically just want to see that you've put some thought into how you're going to implement the mandate. The other requirement you should know about, which takes effect today, is to post signage in the front of your facility, as well as in employee break rooms, notifying the public and your employees about the requirement. On our webpage, you'll find a different version of signs for restaurants, other types of businesses and events, as well as an employee-specific sign that you can post in break rooms. So you can download those, print them out, and post them at your facility and you're supposed to have those in place starting today, just to give people 2 weeks to sort of get to know the requirements that start on the 29th. So that's the sort of nuts and bolts of it. I'm open to taking questions or diving deeper into any particular subject matter. I will note that, I do appreciate the Chamber's input to date. Colin and some of your fellow participants, board members, and participants in the Public Policy Committee did give us really good feedback based on the initial draft of the order that came out. And we did make one significant change to the order last week in response to those concerns. When unvaccinated patrons come on site, or when there's unvaccinated staff members that have an exemption, they can wear any type of mask on site. They do not have to wear a surgical mask or N95 mask. It can be any type of mask, and that was based on feedback from businesses that they had concerns that those masks would be hard to find or difficult to tell what mask is what and enforce. So we appreciate your feedback and hope that helps with the implementation for you all. So I'm open to taking questions, Colin, unless you have anything particular you want me to dive deeper into.
No, you kind of hit part of it on the head. I was thinking that everybody is processing right now because I don't see any questions quite yet in the chat, but for those that do have questions, please drop them in the chat. One thing that I was going to ask that there seems to be a lot of confusion on is, where does the plan or process that a company is going to use need to be posted? Is it just something that's behind the desk, and if the city drops in, they need to show it? Is it similar to the beginning of the pandemic where it needs to be posted in the window? I know we get a lot of questions on that.
Yeah, so the plan does not need to be posted. That just needs to be kept by a manager or somebody, accessible. If, the only time we would check it is if there's a complaint filed, and then we would go out on site, and that's probably the first thing that we would do is say, hey, have you guys thought about this? Have your plan on file? And if you don't, then we would hand you a template and ask you to fill it out. Maybe not then and there, but we would, our enforcement is going to be educational in nature, unless it really comes down to it. I don't expect to have to go beyond that. But yeah, the implementation plan does not need to be posted. What needs to be posted is just a sign basically saying, vaccination will be required starting November 29th. And you're welcome to use whatever sign you like, but if you want to make sure you're getting everything right, you can use one of our signs that we have on our webpage, because those have been vetted, and you can be sure that they talk about the requirements in the correct way.
Perfect.
So post a sign, keep a plan in a desk somewhere.
Sounds good. So there is a question. I am assuming, which is never a good thing to do, that this is for relating to a covered business, but do employees have to show vaccination status if there's less than 100 employees?
Yes. So our vaccination requirement is different than the federal government's. The federal government, I know, put out a mandate for 100 employees or more. Ours does not distinguish for any business size. Really what you need to look at is make sure you're one of the types of covered businesses. So food and beverage, gyms and fitness, entertainment and recreation, personal care.
Okay. And then this was another question, didn't come up today, but it's come up before. What, if anything, is the city going to be doing in terms of education? Because employees, or should I say employers, can do a great job of educating their employees and having signage when somebody enters their business. But in terms of mass education, if you will, and MASS, not MASK, education in terms of what's expected of them as a customer, what is the city doing or prepared to do to assist with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're going to be doing social media. That's one of the main ways that we get the word out about things. We have a pretty active following on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be posting to our webpage. We'll be doing email blasts in the 2 weeks leading up to the start of the vaccination requirement, press release, and And then we've set up a business resource hotline here at the city if there's any questions. And we've already gotten some questions, and that's not only for businesses, but members of the public who have questions about the vaccination requirement. Those are the main ways we're going to get the word out. But if there's any specific suggestions for additional ways, I'm happy to look into those as well.
Perfect. So here's a question that was asked quite a bit, and I know what the stance was for hotels before, but will indoor meetings / social events at hotels need attendees to provide proof of vaccination? That's question, I guess, 1A. And 1B would be, is the hotel required to verify, or is it the meeting planner prior to the event?
Yeah, so I went over this question earlier this week with one of the hoteliers here in town, and I can tell you how we're planning to do it at the city for events. And you can take that and run with it. Like I said, it's open to how you want to enforce, but this is how we're going to do it. And the hotelier I talked to thought that this made sense. Here at the city, we have rental rooms and rental events and have events similar to a hotel. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask the hosts of those meetings to verify. And basically, when we register them and check them in on the day of the event, our staff, as a part of their check-in process, will verify that they have a method in place to verify vaccination status. And before, of course, as soon as possible, we're going to be reaching out to upcoming events and let them know about the vaccination requirement so that they can get started on it and figure out how they're going to do it. But it will be the responsibility of the host. And the host can do it either in 2 ways, 3 ways, really. They could do it at registration. So when guests register for a program or sign up or purchase a ticket, they could submit virtually their COVID vaccination status, or you can do it at check-in. So, a lot of times there's a registration table or some sort of check-in where you get your name tag for an event, and the host could do it there on site. You could also, what was the third way? Well, those are the 2 major ways. So yeah, it's really the host's responsibility to verify. That's how we're going to do it at the city, and I think that would probably work best for hotels as well.
Okay. I guess along the same lines, no, different question. Actually, I'll come back to that one. What does a religious verification in lieu of vaccination verification look like? Is it something that's optional, or what is sufficient for that? Yeah,
so our regulations are for patrons and people coming on site to businesses are a little different than LA's. City of LA specifies that if people are going to request an exemption when they're coming on site, they are required to demonstrate religious or medical exemption. Here in Culver City, we don't really discriminate for patrons. We didn't really want to get into it, for patrons of businesses. And so you don't really need to see why they're unvaccinated. If someone's unvaccinated, it doesn't really matter if they're a patron. They have to follow the same requirements, which is to show a proof of a negative test within 3 days and wear a mask on site if they're coming indoors to dine indoors or get a massage indoors. For employees, the only eligible exemptions to the vaccination requirement are religious or medical exemptions. So for employees, that's when the religious or medical exemption comes into play. Everyone's required to be vaccinated unless they have submitted a request for a medical or religious exemption, and that exemption has been approved by you as the employer. So for religious exemption, we've spent a lot of time looking into this because the city itself has its own vaccination requirement for our employees. And so we spent a lot of time talking to attorneys who have very significant experience in employment law. And employees' rights when it comes to religious medical exemptions are fairly broad. And so, I encourage you to, if necessary, speak to your own legal representation. I'm not a lawyer, I can't give legal advice. but basically any sort of religious statement or linkage that an employee is claiming between their religious belief or personal religious belief and not wanting to get vaccinated, it's pretty hard to deny that sort of religious request. You can do some gentle prodding into, meet with them and talk to them about why, what the linkage is between their religion and not wanting to get vaccinated. But at the end of the day, their explanation does not even need to make logical sense. It just needs to be deeply held, and that entitles them to an exemption for their religious beliefs. So I would suggest, if there is a religious exemption request, that you require the employee to provide something written to you so that you have a written record, and that whatever is written is religious in nature, and not just simply, I believe that vaccinations are bad, or I don't want to get vaccinated. That's not religious. That's not related to religion or deeply held belief. It has to be religious related, but I would say just have something written from the employee that cites religion and somehow links it to religion. And if it's not strong enough in the first draft, you can ask them questions and say, hey, is this truly religious? And maybe they can provide something that's more, that's a stronger statement, or somehow goes into more detail about what the nature of their religious belief is. So it's fairly ambiguous. You can Google and read a lot online about this. This is all a matter of case law that's been developed over the past 200 years. And at the end of the day, in our country, people are given quite a bit of leeway for their religious beliefs. So, and employees are given a lot of protections for that. So right or wrong, that's what it is. And so that's what I would recommend for religious verification. For medical exemptions for employees, on the other hand, we're pretty specific about what we require the employer to ask for in those occasions. If an employee is requesting a medical exemption from you, we require a signed statement from an MD or a nurse practitioner or someone practicing under the auspices of an MD, basically saying that this person needs a medical exemption. So that's pretty specific, but the religious exemption is more vague.
Okay.
Now, I did get the question earlier this week from a business about if there was any sort of a requirement from the city to maintain those records of exemption. And I would say, check with your own legal representation on that. As far as the city is concerned, there's no specific requirements. We don't say you have to file these and make them subject to the city's review. But it's probably a good idea to at least keep on file, a list of your employees who are exempt and the reasons why they were granted exemptions in case any questions arise in the future. If the city got a complaint from one of the employees who didn't feel comfortable because they knew another employee wasn't vaccinated, who knows, they might call the city might call the business, and then, it would probably be handy for the business to say, no, I have a copy of my religious exemption letter that they submitted and a copy of a letter I gave back to them saying, you're exempt from this requirement. So for your own documentation purposes, in the event that some questions arise, it's probably a good idea to have something written, some written file for this, but there's no sort of formal filing requirements or, requirement to maintain those documents for any particular amount of time or anything like that.
And is the same go for just verification? Let's assume that we all work for the same company and everybody's been verified. As an employer, is it fine to have a spreadsheet that I have checked off that everybody's been verified, or do I need to have copies of people's card or a scan of a digital? What's being required? There's obviously some concern in terms of record retention.
Yeah, there's no particular requirement. You don't have to keep copies of the cards. If there's a spreadsheet where you note that you you've seen the card from each employee, that's probably handy for your own purposes to make sure that you're in compliance with the order. but the city is not going to cite you because you don't have a PDF of everyone's vaccine card on hand.
Okay, so this question is tied to retail. I believe I know the answer, but I'd rather you answer it. So is there a difference in the requirements for retailers in an indoor mall versus a shopping center?
No, our order is different than LA's, and it doesn't specifically mention shopping centers or retail malls. Basically, we're looking at the specific business. So, within Westfield, there are many different types of businesses, and the ones that are subject to the order are the ones dealing with food and beverage or personal care. I don't know if there's a gym at Westfield, but
Yeah,
not, say a clothing store.
Gold's Gym.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, Gold's Gym. Yes. Yes. So yeah, does that make sense? It's not the overall property. It's going to be the business within the certain shopping center or the mall that's subject to it.
Yep.
So you won't have to show your vaccination status to get into the mall. But if, say, you're going to go to the Olive Garden at the mall, the host or hostess at the Olive Garden would review vaccination status on check-in.
So I have a follow-up question to that, and then a different question. And the follow-up question is, according to my email, we're getting pretty close to Black Friday, which means that there's going to be a significant increase in shopping. As I guess the order goes into effect after said Black Friday, it would essentially go into effect on Cyber Monday. But is there any thought from the city that this can be expanded upon, or is this pretty much what we think will be? I guess what I'm asking is, is there any conversation about adding additional business sectors or industries, or is this pretty much going to be what we'll have moving forward until we don't?
Yeah, no, there's been no discussion of adding additional business sectors to this list. I would say no, definitely not. Even if we wanted to, we would not have time to do that before Black Friday. So, and I don't anticipate that we would add additional business sectors.
Okay. So two things. One, I'd like you to restate this because you did share this with our government affairs. We have some different folks here. What is the time frame, more or less, that this additional order would be in effect?
Yeah, the order is in effect. Technically, the order is in effect until the emergency ends, the end of the public emergency. And the city would most likely not end its emergency order until the state and the county end theirs. We look to their guidance because they're the public health authorities. That said, we have sunset other parts of the, public orders over time. Part of our public order used to include lockdown. And so we sunset that earlier than the end of the order. I would anticipate that we would sunset these provisions as soon as it's advisable by public health. We'll be looking to LA County Public Health to give some guidance. So I think we'll be tracking them and seeing what they're doing with their, their vaccination verification requirement and following them pretty closely. So I would hope, it's only in effect for a couple of months, but it really depends on how the coronavirus numbers go.
Okay. And in terms of safety, because when you look at the industries you mentioned, food and drink, personal care, and gyms and fitness, most of the people that are front-facing customers are generally either newer employees, less seasoned employees, sometimes younger employees. Is there any provisions being looked at in terms of, as an employer, I wouldn't want my employees necessarily potentially being in harm's way where you may have disgruntled customers? And so what is the response I should give to businesses when they ask that question?
I would say that we don't anticipate, physical threats of violence, or, we don't anticipate this becoming there may be some words, but I don't anticipate any sort of violence coming out of this. If, obviously if people feel physically threatened, CCPD is, ready to respond at a moment's notice. I would say have in place procedures where a manager can be easily called over. That's what we're going to be doing at the city. We don't want to get into long arguments between, the frontline counter staff and any patrons who may be disgruntled about this. But if that ever comes down, I think pretty quickly in the encounter, we would transfer that person to a manager, have a manager step over and talk to the person. And they would hopefully be able to respond in a better way. I think having good signage up will help at any sort of front entrance or any sort of counter. And so that you're able to point to the signage and show that, look, this is a requirement of the city. I would say, anytime you're able to, blame the city, put the onus back on the city and say, look, this is a city requirement. We're just upholding the law. We have a legal requirement to do this. And if you don't like it, you can complain to the city, complain to the city. So that's what I would say. Hopefully it won't lead to sort of negative encounters. I think, when you look at our vaccination rate in Culver City, I think a lot of people are vaccinated. You have more people coming in from outside the city. We're a regional draw, and those people may not be as vaccinated. So you may get pushback from those people, but I think that given the fact that City of LA has the requirement, County of LA has the requirement, I think people are going to become used to these requirements going into effect pretty quickly, and I don't think that they're going to be reacting in a violent manner anytime they encounter them. I'd also say, be sure to notify your patrons early and often. You can put a note on your webpage. You can talk to them about it when they're making a reservation. You can have signage up, like I said, just so that this is not the first time they've heard about it when they, go to order their burger. I'd also say be aware of the different options that you can present people who are unvaccinated. There are different options. You don't have to just totally deny them service. They can eat outdoors. They can order indoors for takeaway, or to go, or order for pickup. There are different options that you can give people, so it's not just totally denying service.
Okay.
Colin, I'm gonna add just one thing. There's also LA County has examples of vaccination with the vaccination records that could be a good visual for employees. So we can provide that. I'm trying to put some of the questions that we've been getting. I'm trying to kind of put them together because they're pretty standard in a document, so we can make sure that to have all those things in one document for businesses. So that could be something that employers could have handy as a kind of handbook for employees to look at.
Sounds good. So question for hotels, some clients have contracted their events months in advance, a little different than walking in for a burger, which will likely trigger a force majeure if the vaccine stipulation wasn't made clear in their contracts. So I guess it was a question is, do you think that it will trigger or could trigger that?
I'm not an attorney, like I said, but we looked at this issue ourselves for our city agreements with our renters, and we're pretty comfortable with, I can't say specifically what the language is. There's, pretty standard clauses in agreements that say that, people have to follow all local rules and regulations, and that would include this regulation. So I would advise them to just look at their contract and make sure that there's nothing in there that basically, says that the person has to follow all local rules and regulations. Do that first.
Okay. And then would you mind, I know we had some people that jumped on a little bit after we started, and since we're recording this, if you don't mind stating the date as well, because today when somebody watches, it may not be today still. But you had mentioned that there's a portion of this order that goes into effect today that businesses are required to do. If you don't mind stating the date that it goes into effect and what that actually is.
Yeah, so beginning today, November 12th, 2021, businesses are required to display information about the vaccination requirement on their premises, visible to patrons prior to entry, as well as in any employee break rooms. So if you go to our webpage, culvercity.org/coronavirus, we have some example posters that you can download and use, one for restaurants, one for other types of facilities, and one for special events. And we also have a different one for your employee break room, basically letting folks know that, hey, in 2 weeks on November 29th, we're gonna be subject to the city requirement.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions from anybody? I'm sure, like with most of us, sometime in the middle of your day or later on, you'll think of some questions. Maybe a good one is, where or who should folks direct questions to as they start to think of them? Because between now and next Monday, I'm sure there will be things that arise and communicating.
Absolutely. So Elizabeth Garcia, I'm glad she was able to join us this morning. She's with our Economic Development Division, and she's going to be the best resource for you. She's front and center on our business assistance hotline and our business assistance team. And so if Elizabeth, if you don't mind putting your contact information in the chat, then folks can reach out to you if they have questions or concerns.
And to confirm this question, another one that I'm pretty sure I know the answer to, but I'll pose it to you, Jesse. If you're not a covered business under this order, do you need to post any of the signage that you've mentioned?
No, you do not.
Okay. Perfect.
Businesses are welcome to, develop their own vaccination policies. There's nothing keeping you from, if you're a clothing store, having your own vaccination requirement for on site. I have seen that, but it's not part of the city order, and you can put up whatever sign you want.
So a little tougher to blame the city for that one, but you can still do it.
True.
All right. Any final questions that you'd like to pose today? Otherwise, you see Elizabeth's contact in the chat. She's been great this whole process and is very accessible. But I'm going to say going once, twice. All right. Well, thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us. Thank all of you for joining. I would highly encourage, I'll just share this recording will be on our website likely by the afternoon. And so if you maybe didn't take great notes and you want to go back to it, we'll have a link to that, as well as a link to where the actual order is and the frequently asked questions sheet that the city put together. So thank you all for joining, and hopefully you have a good rest of your day and a productive weekend.